First of all, what are the qualities we need for life? What are the qualities we need when we wake up in the morning and first venture out of bed for this ever-standing miracle, this 24 hours we've been delivered? And I like to think of what the Spanish philosopher Ortega once wrote, that we're here to write, act out, and produce our own drama. There is no precedent for you or for me. I am the one and only George Sheehan that will ever exist. And so we are each of us unique, never to be repeated events. And therefore, we have every day to choose, pick and choose what we're going to do. As Ortega said, life is fired at us point blank, and we must choose. And so each day then is making this choice and acting out that drama that we were born to produce. And we see this in thinkers from the beginning of time. Emerson said, we're here to bear a fruit, to deliver a message, to have a point of view. And so what are the qualities then that we should rise for that day? It seems to me it very much resembles what happens in football. Football teams go into a game with a game plan. About 2 series of downs and the game plan is out the window. I remember there was a story about Benny Leonard, the great fighter, and he said, I win boxing matches because I keep the other fellow from doing what he wants to do. And what happens when you get up in the morning, from minute 1, you're beginning to find out that people are going to prevent you from doing what you want to do. Your game plan is going to go out the window. And so the winning coaches win not because of game plans, but they win because of fundamentals. And you find that Lombardi was the first coach that had 11 players in on every play. And 11 players doing the fundamentals. People who would block and tackle and run and pass. No fancy dance, just doing the fundamentals. And what are those fundamentals? Well, I think they are what one runner reported to Dr. William Morgan up at the University of Wisconsin, a sports psychologist, about running. He said he had been running because of the energy, clarity, and self-esteem he received out on the road. It seems to me, and you'll see this thread starting with the Greeks in the 5th century BC, this thread of the 3 qualities of body, mind, and spirit, energy of the body, clarity of the mind, and self-esteem of the spirit. Those things, you see this repeated again and again, this holistic approach to life, so that you're bringing all of your energies together, not only your physical energy, but your mental energy and your spiritual energy. And what fitness is then is not merely fitness of the body, you see. We're going back to that original classical idea of a sound mind and a sound body. The human machine is that body-mind complex that expresses the soul. We'll be repeating over this talk the idea of these 3 simple things. What we're coming to now is this holistic approach to life. We're getting a holistic approach to medicine, and we're beginning to have a holistic approach to management, all incorporating these 3 factors. So here's these qualities then that we need to face the day, and that's what we get. We have the energy now. When you use your body with intensity and become fit, you may not get longevity. You may not live a day longer, but you're going to live a longer day. I've been running for 20 years, and what that 20 years has done is given me a 20-year addition to my life. My day no longer ends when the work is finished. It begins. I have a second day. You know, Arnold Bennett wrote in 1910, he wrote a book, How to Live on 24 Hours a Day. He had come upon this great secret. We weren't going to get any more time. And so we have 8 hours to sleep. We have 16 hours to work with. And what fitness does is give you that additional 8 hours. So you have the energy. You have the energy to live that life. Now, what about the clarity? I like that word. Clarity has to do with perspective. It has to do with a sense of humor. It has to do with knowing what's second rate and what's first rate. It's having to know with what is trivia and what isn't trivia. And so clarity allows you to take what is important in your life and concentrate on it. Not only that, what we find with the fit person exercising frees the mind and allows the mind to play. And then finally we have the self-esteem. Well, you may have read this recent book by Reverend Robert Schuller called The New Reformation, Self-Esteem. And he discovered that through the Gallup poll that Americans who have self-esteem are happier, healthier, and more productive than those who have low self-esteem. So these are the factors that we will talk about of introducing into your life. Now, I do a lot of talking on campus. And when I go to campus, I talk to these students about heresy. Again, this is a Greek word meaning choice. And what I'm asking them to do is choose the body. You go on the campus and you begin to realize that the body is a second-class citizen. We've been taught since we go to school that the body is bad, we have to save our soul. Then all they're concerned about is our IQ and PSAT test, and then when we get to work, we're either a blue-collar worker or a white-collar worker. But the body is us. We're going to live this body physically. We're going to live this life physically, and we have to live at the top of our powers. And so we must learn physically to be all we can be. It's odd that the real reasons for being fit are those we learn from the philosophers, not from the experts and the physicians or the physical educators or the coaches. The philosophers are the ones that point out the fact that we must be fit. It is part of our nature to be fit. We look back, and I keep going back to the 5th century BC Greeks because, you see, they were the first aristocrats. The word aristocrat comes from the word arete, which means to function as you are supposed to function, to be the best you can be. Now, it's not the best in your community or the best in your company or even the best on your block. It's the best possible you. Just that I'm trying to be the best possible George Sheehan. That's what arete means. Now, what the Greeks did, you see, was take their lives and try to make them a work of art. If you think about the 5th century BC Greeks, you realize that they had no antiquity. They were the first civilized people, and what they did was find that the body and mind should work in harmony. And so their training of the body was equal to the training of the mind. If you read Plato's Republic, you see that he suggests that the mathematician lift weights and that the wrestler study philosophy. And so we had that sort of union, that first holistic idea, and the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Every athlete knows that. 2 and 2 makes 5 for the athlete. Once you get it all together, that's what the Greeks try to get it all together. As a matter of fact, their word for leisure was skole. Their leisure was a school they went to perfect themselves. And their curriculum was designed to make that life a work of art. And so this word arete keeps coming back every time we have an aristocracy, every time we have an affluent society where we have all the time and money to be anything we can be, we start going back to the body, perfecting the body. And Schopenhauer, when he talks about the self, he said, the self consists of what a man is, what a man has, and what people think about him. And he said, as you grow, you realize that 95% of that is what you are, not what you have or what people think about you. And so we see coming down Erich Fromm where he said, modern man has everything, he is nothing. And people begin to realize that. They go through this nouveau riche thing, and then they realize it's the self that's important. And now I can develop myself. And what we're seeing in America right now is this grassroots movement. It's not due to the doctors. I wish as a doctor I could take credit for these 50 million people that are out developing their bodies and minds and souls. We had nothing to do with it. We were late in arriving. Physical educators had nothing to do with it. Why is it the kids who love to play hate phys ed? Because they destroyed the play element, and that's what we brought that back. And the coaches are elitist, that's fine, but they want to deal with motor geniuses, and they don't realize that each one of us is an elite. Each one of us deserves to be coached. Each one of us deserves to be the best body we can be. And what we found is that the rules are so simple. Human beings do not come in new and improved models. They're not like automobiles or other products in this technological age. The child born today is the same as the one born in the 5th century BC. And so we know those rules. The rules of health have not changed, and what we're talking about is simply athletic training. And if you don't know what the Greeks did, at least you know what the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Cubs and the Knicks and the 76ers do. You know the rules that an athlete learns. Athletes are seeking arete in the best possible way. If you had read, for instance, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, what he's looking for is quality. And when you get toward the end of the book, you realize, and he does, that quality equals arete. What we, in our parlance, call arete is class. It's simply having class. And we know that the athletes that have class are the ones that follow these rules. I found a simple listing of these rules in studies done by the Breslows. They are sociologists on the West Coast at UCLA, and they studied a large group of people in 1972 and found there were 7 rules for health, that people who observed these rules and were in their 60s, for instance, were in much better health and had a greater longevity than people in their 20s or 30s who observed only 2 or 3 of them. The rules are very simple. There are 7 in number. The first rule is eat a big breakfast. Eat a good breakfast. And that's been our tradition over the centuries. Wherever there's hard work being done, and when you become an athlete, you're going to be working hard, people eat a good breakfast. And not only that, it matches with our circadian rhythms, those bodily tides that ebb and flow. You see, we are supposed to peak around 2 to 4 in the afternoon. If you eat a good, solid breakfast, you're going to find that you will have a solid work day. And then, contrary to what we do, eating the big dinner at night, we should be taking pasta and carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables at night to bring the body down into sleep. I've found going over the country that vestiges of this large breakfast still remain. There's a cowboy's breakfast in Scottsdale and a farmer's breakfast in Minneapolis. My grandfather was a farmer, upstate New York. He was dead before I was born, but we used to hear stories about what they had for breakfast. Incredible. It was what we ate for dinner. It was pie and meat and everything else. Why? Because they weren't coming back. They ate and they went out on the fields and they worked all day. Now, the second rule was eat that big breakfast, lock yourself into a good work day. The second rule was don't eat between meals. If you eat a breakfast like that, you don't have to worry about eating between. You're not even going to think food until supper. The third was maintain your weight. Now, that sounds like a simple rule, but I'm in a study at the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. It's a study of the physiological rate of aging. Now, most of the examples, the normals, so-called normals that we find in medical books are sedentary individuals. They make no allowance for training. So what we thought was the physiological aging of an individual was simply people rusting out. They were sitting around not training. They took 15 runners, similar to me, 60-year-old runners. The requirement was that we ran in college so they could match us now with 20-year-old runners that are in college that run approximately what we did 40 years ago. What they have discovered that in the 40 years since I was 20 and running at college as a miler, and right now I'm running competitively, that I have lost only 15% of my maximum oxygen uptake. Now that, unless I was in competition, that wouldn't be apparent. I am in as good shape as this 20-year-old for endurance activity. That my energy level is practically identical to what it was when I was 20, and that aging is a myth. Now, Walter Bortz, whose father was president of the AMA, and he's at the Palo Alto Clinic, did a study recently where he set up in 2 columns the effect of inactivity and the effect of so-called aging. They're identical. The blood pressure goes up, the heart size goes down, the cardiac output goes down, you lose calcium out of your bones, you lose lean muscle mass, all with activity, all presumably with aging. What we thought was aging was simply inactivity. And so this use of the body can start at any age. You can start into a fitness activity whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. We have people in their 80s now getting into fitness programs. There's a lady, 84, that ran the New York Marathon last year. There's no limits to what you can do. So those are the first 3 rules. The 4th rule is don't smoke. Well, tobacco is one of a number of pollutants that we should avoid. We know that the running body does not want to smoke. I never told people not to smoke in my practice. I think that once you get started into a fitness program, your body will stop the smoking. Your body has a mind of its own that will cease smoking. Peter Wood at Stanford has done studies on relatively high mileage runners who were 3 and 4 pack a day smokers. None of them smoke anymore. However, the running body apparently likes to drink. And Peter Wood found that numbers of these high mileage runners took 2, 3, 4 drinks a day. Oddly, this was in accord with what the Breslows found. Their 5th rule was drink moderately. And now we have substantial evidence coming in that 2 drinks a day is probably, if not beneficial, at least is not harmful. And people who take 2 drinks a day apparently live longer than people who totally abstain or those that take more. So drink moderately. The 5th rule, or 6th rule, was get a good night's sleep. Well, this is I thought when I read this is peculiar, because how does one go and get a good night's sleep? One cannot force a good night's sleep. And what I finally discovered this from my own experience is that the Breslows were reporting what these people told them, that they did indeed have a good night's sleep. Well, a good night's sleep is in the eye of the sleeper. And I'm 64 years old, and that is an age that the World Health Organization calls elderly. And if you read about the elderly, you'll find that we do indeed have sleep disturbances. We have trouble getting to sleep, and then our sleep is interrupted repeatedly during the night for things that I won't go into in any detail. And it is. But what I discovered, because I love to use that time to think, is that this time getting to sleep I enjoy, and then I enjoy being awakened and have another opportunity to think again. I would put it this way, that I use my running to write my columns and to think out my speeches and to develop lectures. And so that running is my creative time. Next best time is when I'm lying in bed about to go to sleep. And if you've ever been a writer, you know that you're trying to get what is called a lead, which is the theme of what you're writing. And you're trying to get the first paragraph, because then it follows. Everything follows after the first paragraph. And what you're looking for is the absolute best first sentence, so no one will ever forget that first sentence. And so I'm lying there in bed looking for that theme and the first paragraph and that absolute best sentence, and then the next thing I know, I'm asleep. But fortunately, because I'm elderly, I'm again awakened, and I have another opportunity to do this. And so the night goes. And if somebody was in the house, they said, well, George had a terrible night. I heard him up 5 times, when actually I had a wonderful night's sleep. What the Breslows was saying was that a good night's sleep means a good day that you can think about. The people that have a bad night's sleep have days that they don't want us to lie awake thinking about. And so what they were reporting were people that were psychologically secure, who felt good about what they were doing and enjoyed themselves. And their final rule, and of course this is the key to what we're talking about, is exercise regularly. Now exercising regularly, and the fitness formula, means 30 minutes. A lot of people ask me how many miles I should run, how many laps I should swim, how far should I go on the bicycle, how far should I walk. It has nothing to do with distance. It has to do with time. It's minutes. It's 30 minutes. And then people will say, well, how fast? Should I run 10-minute miles? Should I walk 3 miles in an hour? Or should I cycle so many miles or so many laps? And it has nothing to do with that numerical content. It has to do with a perception you have of your effort. It has to do with being comfortable. Now, comfortable is a place between light and somewhat hard. It's in there where you can feel that the body's doing something, but it's enjoyable. And it's that dialing to that's the training pace. So it's 30 minutes at this comfortable rate. If you're uncertain about what's comfortable, you can use the talk test, which is the ability to talk with someone while you're running, or walking, or jogging, or cycling. The AMA, American Medical Association, suggests that level is the point at which you first begin to breathe through your mouth instead of through your nose. So these are ways to establish comfortable. This is 30 minutes at a comfortable pace. Now, how often do you have to do it? Well, the suggestion is 4 times a week. That is our minimum weekly requirements for fitness, would be this 30 minutes at a comfortable pace 4 times a week. Now, is 30 minutes or are 30 minutes enough? Well, yes, physically it's enough. But what we're thinking about is this total fitness. And again, I'm thinking of this 3-level sort of situation. And if you think of it over the ages, what the experts in all these functions of the self have asked us for is an hour a day. So the physiologists want an hour a day for our body. The thinkers want an hour a day for our mind. And the preachers want an hour a day for our soul. And we see this. Physiologists can prove it. You can go and give this hour a day and get on the treadmill, and in 12 weeks your physical work capacity increased 300 or 400%. Now, what about the thinkers? I remember a quote from Emerson. He said, "I believe that to every well-ordered mind," and we can all have a well-ordered mind, "comes a thought each day." Comes a thought each day. So he said, thinkers since the time of Pythagoras have set aside an hour a day to go and see what the oracle has to impart. What I find is I take this hour from my body, and I'm also going consulting the oracle, because I'm able to think while I'm running. As far as your soul is concerned, I remember a book by Father Henri Nouwen, who is a lecturer and teacher and writer, a Belgian priest who at one point was so caught up with his lecturing and teaching and writing while he was preaching meditation and solitude that he had no time for meditation and solitude. So he finally decided to take a step back, and he went to a Trappist monastery in Genesee, New York, which is outside of Rochester, 7 months. So he wrote a book called A Genesee Diary. And in that, he discovered, he took this step back and spent the 7 months, but when he was coming out, he realized he was still Henri Nouwen. He had not changed. He was fine in the monastery, but he knew as soon as he got outside, he was going to be in the same situation. So he went to the abbot and he said, "What am I going to do?" And the abbot said, "You must take Genesee with you. You see, you have to take this experience with you and spend an hour each day renewing it." And so you see, this whole thing, this whole fitness thing is to bring these 3 forces together, the body, mind, and soul. Get that hour. Take that step back that Henri Nouwen did. Oddly enough, when he went in the monastery, they immediately assigned him the kitchen to make bread, and he had to go out and collect rocks to build a chapel. Then he had his little cell where he could go to and meditate, and then he had the community where he was drawing the spiritual strength. We can do the same thing. We can go out. We have that hour for our body, to perfect that body. Going back to the philosophers, you see Thoreau saying our first duty is to make to ourselves a perfect body. Spencer, the philosopher, said, and he was thought at that time to be the most intelligent man in England back in the mid-1800s. In his treatise on education, he said, "If you wish to be a success in this life, you must be first a good animal." And you see that again and again in the philosophers. They call us animals. That's the substrate. Then they put adjectives: social, technological, problem-solving, theological. Whatever you do, however you function humanly, you begin as this animal, to be the best possible animal, to have all that energy. You see, our terrible tendency is not to cheat other people, it's to cheat on the self. What I've found now, I no longer compare myself to anybody else. I'm not superior, inferior to anyone else. I am superior or inferior to the self that I've been made to be. And that is where we're using that 24 hours to develop the self, and develop it in these 3 aspects again. To be that good animal the philosophers ask us to be, and then to become the thinking animal, and finally the loving spiritual animal. And you put this all together, but it has to start physically. I see this again and again. When I go out and I speak to runners, there might be 500 people in the room, and I know there are 500 stories. There's a before they got into, we can call that their particular fitness program, that running program. There's a before and an after. They have been transformed. And what they have done is done it themselves, you see. This is a human potential movement with movement. This is a human potential movement that involves the mind and the spirit as well as the body. You know, William James, who is the American philosopher, said life is made in doing, which is the body, in creating, which is the mind, and in suffering, which is the soul. And it's, again, we see those three concepts, you know. He was the president of the American Philosophical Society. In 1906, he gave a speech as presidential address. And he said, "Tonight, gentlemen, I want to consider the problem of the energies of man. To what extent do we have energies?" You know, only physicians weren't asking that. Physical educators, coaches weren't even asking that. Here's the philosophers asking, to what extent do we have energy? And James said then, he said, "I notice there are people who have a second wind and a third wind and a fourth wind. They seem to have subterranean sources of energy." And he said, "When I look around, I realize that most of us are leading lives inferior to ourselves." And in that he meant inferior to ourselves in every aspect. And not inferior to the person next to you or the mayor or the corporate executive, just inferior to the self you could be. This is where the philosopher is coming down to each individual soul and saying you are cheating on that self that you were born to be. Possibly the best account, a kind of a spiritual and psychological biography on becoming an athlete, because that's what we're talking about, becoming an athlete. Not on, you see, again, James, he called athletes secular saints, and he called saints athletes of God. See, becoming an athlete, the word comes from the Greek, it comes from two Greek words. One is prize, one is struggle. You see, the struggle is for the prize that's yourself. So it's this idea of becoming an athlete that goes through this whole trend in the philosophers, in James and the rest. I think the best description of becoming an athlete is in a book by Yukio Mishima called Sun and Steel. Mishima was the Japanese candidate for the Nobel Prize. He was among his novels is The Captain Who Fell from Grace on the Sea. And he was an actor, playwright, complete intellectual. Sun and Steel is an account of, as he said, a puny intellectual becoming an athlete. It began because of his interest and his desire to commit suicide. As a matter of fact, this book was written in his 46th year, which was the year he did indeed commit suicide. And I don't understand, and I'm sure most of us don't understand this interest or part of the Japanese tradition and culture. But the book itself is a marvelous description by a man who was a consummate artist and a handler of words of the athletic experience. One of the things that Mishima said he discovered was that his body did not speak Japanese, that he learned things through his body that there was no words for. And he said the supreme nonverbal expression was group pain, the feeling of sharing of pain with other people. And people who are in athletic contests realize this. They're aware of this, that there's something that cannot be expressed when you join with other people in sport. But basically what occurred with Mishima was that he perfected himself physically. Sun was the fact that he came out into the sunlight. He was writing all night and spending his nights in his activity. Instead, he came out into the sun and became an athlete. Steel was the use of weights to develop the classical body. Eventually, and this is in his 46th year, he said, eventually I became the person my Creator had in mind the day I was born. He had achieved his objective, and that's when he went with his companions, I think, to the emperor's palace and committed suicide. When I spoke earlier about the speaking to college students and advising them on heresy and making choices, the first choice is for the body. The second choice is for play. Again, You see, play has been discarded from our concept of adult life. It would disappear somewhere around grammar school. We get into high school and we have phys ed and teams we can't make, and we show school spirit by watching other children have fun. But play itself is something that is necessary for creativity. Again, we find this thought expressed in writers over the century. We had the people who had to walk in order to think. We have the peripatetic philosophers in Greece. We have the lake poets. And almost every thinker, when you look in the diary, you find that they were great walkers. Kierkegaard had something about, I walk myself into my best thoughts. I walk myself into health. There's no disease I cannot walk away from, no thought so bad that I can't dispose of it by walking. And Thoreau saying, the length of my walking is the length of my writing. At the turn of the century, almost all the faculty members in the English colleges were great walkers, took what were called constitutionals, 7 or 8 mile walks. And so again and again we see this idea that somehow walking opens up the brain, but somehow movement of the body opens up the brain and lends itself to meditation and creativity. I've made a study of these things, and I keep picking up mention in Oliver Wendell Holmes. In his books, he mentions that in walking, the action is so automatic it frees the mind to do whatever it wants. He speaks about sculling on the Charles. I've always been tempted to try that myself, as lending itself to this mental activity. In Emerson, we see that walking is excellent for gymnastics of the mind. And so when we talk about this hour for the body, you see that the same hour is for the mind. If you can do something that the body will do automatically so you can dissociate from it. The fitness formula that I spoke of has duration, 30 minutes, intensity, comfortable, frequency 4 times a week. But then you might ask, well, what is it that I do? In the fitness formula, the first thing, of course, is the mode of exercise. What is the mode of exercise? What exercises may I do to get fit? Well, we have learned since 1968 that almost all the effects of fitness activity is on the periphery. It's in the muscle. Now, the heart is a muscle and partakes of this, but the essential changes are in the muscle. Now, therefore, the more muscle you use in fitness activity, the more fit you will become. And that's why you try to use large muscle groups. And preferably, of course, would be in the legs, because that's where your largest muscles are. So any activity that uses the legs, large muscle of the legs, continuously for 30 minutes at a comfortable pace will make you fit. And that leaves it only open to your ingenuity. The primary ways of doing that, of course, would be walking, cycling, jogging, swimming, aerobic dancing, rope skipping, cross-country skiing. So you can see any activity that will use these muscles continuously. Now, you might mention tennis. What about tennis? Well, people who put a stopwatch on, tennis players find that they are active 5 minutes out of the half hour. So if you're going to use a racket sport, you should have a friend clock you with a stopwatch to see how much of that time on the court you're actually in motion. Similarly with golf and other activities, you'll find that when you do a time study on them, that the 30 minutes takes quite a bit of time, more than as in running and walking and swimming and cycling is virtually continuous. So the mode of activity is to use large muscle groups continuously, and any activity that will do that will make you fit. I was saying that when I speak to college students and preach heresy, that they must choose play. And finally, that they must choose some type of discipline activity that involves some sweat and effort and even pain. And because that's where you're going to come up with the final value from your fitness program, which has to do with your own self-image and self-esteem. What occurs then, when you develop self-esteem, you're going to find that you trust your own experience, that you're willing to make choices, you're willing to take risks, you're willing to live your own life out of your own experience. It is true, I think, and I've discovered, that only those things that are self-experience will change behavior. You can listen to a lot of talk and be convinced, perhaps, in your own mind, but unless you've experienced the truth of what you've been told, you won't follow it. And when I speak to runners, I find that this is so. What they have done is come to make their own decision. They become athletes. They've learned to listen to their body. They've learned to listen to what their mind is telling them, and they learn to trust their emotions. And they're acting now out of the self that they've developed. I met a runner in a race up in New York State, and he said to me, I'm 165 pounds now, and 3 years ago I was 230, smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day and drank 5 quarts of booze a week. And now he was 165 pounds, and he was in this race that I'd been in. I thought at that time that if he'd gone to a psychiatrist 3 years before, what would have developed? Would anything have happened? Would he have changed in any way? They might have been able to stop his smoking and drinking, but they wouldn't have found the person that was incognito in that body. And now here we have this person transformed, and by his own hand. That, I think, is what fitness does for you. It brings out that person, that individual that you are, that may now be incognito in that body, that mind that has been rusting away and has done nothing creative, and that soul that is neatly wrapped and unused. And what we're looking for then is primarily to learn how the human machine works. When you think of it, how much of your education has been spent in learning how to make a living and not learning how to live? Learn how the human machine works. Learn that the human body is one of the marvels of the universe, that like David, we're marvelously made, that we have capabilities, as William James said back in 1906. To what extent do we have energies? Does anybody realize that energy is resident in your body? What we're seeing is a revolution in energy in this country. Women who thought a trip to the shopping center was a big deal are now going out and running marathons. I met Jessie Bell the other day, who was with president of Bonnie Bell Company, and they put on races for women, just for women, and he was leaving to the West Coast to attend their first triathlon. 1,000 women in a triathlon. I find that incredible even to me, and I'm sure thinking of that 10 years ago, it would have been inconceivable. What we're having is this tremendous revolution in our thinking. Again, we go back to the fact that what we're in now is a renaissance. We have this new aristocracy, and the requirements, not only this affluent society sets us up, what we have is an elevation of our consciousness to what we can do, and then the opportunity to do it. To have your consciousness elevated, as William James was trying to do to his fellow philosophers, is simply to observe what your neighbors are doing. To see that America is developing a consensus about lifestyle. We are seeing in this country a new generation that has superseded the me generation. You know, Thomas Wolfe said, what will you do when you have all the time and money to do whatever you want to do? We saw what happened. People dropped out. They saw this nouveau riche society and decided they didn't want any part of it and dropped out, but they dropped out physically, they dropped out mentally, they dropped out spiritually. This is not happening now. America, as I see it, has decided to play this game to the hilt. They are coming in and living life right at the peak of their powers. And the experts have no recognition of this. Doctors think people are out running on the roads because of their high-density lipids or hypertension, when they're actually finding the self. Physical educators think we're doing this simply to become fit, when we're finding play and creativity and all these other values. And the coaches think that we should be all spectators watching the experts. And we realize that we are the experts. We are the experts in ourselves. And we are the stars. We are the athletes. And each day is an Olympiad to us just as much as it is to Frank Shorter and Bill Rogers and all those great gold medal winners. So that's where I see fitness coming from. I think that fitness is something that goes back over the centuries. The rules are simple. It's simply a matter of having your consciousness elevated to your own capabilities. We have the opportunity, and the rules are there to be followed. Once one gets into fitness, the tendency is to go further and to become an athlete and to have the athletic experience. Now, I had occasion to speak in Ottawa to the sports psychologists on the meaning of sport in life. I was assigned to that with 2 or 3 other gentlemen, and after some thinking about it, I came up with this idea about the athletic experience, that it was divided into 3 parts. The first part is exercise, and that's the physical fitness part of being an athlete. Exercise is work. It's going out and doing interval quarters and laps and things that the coach is putting you through in order for you to compete at a later date. And this part of the fitness experience is almost totally sensual. It can be good. I mean, it's just that good feeling about sweating and the rest. It isn't the total athletic experience as you would expect. The next part of it is competition. It is the contest, it's the race or the game. And that part is what William James first suggested as being the moral equivalent of war. He felt that we needed an arena where we could be heroic. We needed a theater where we were able to do these great deeds. And it isn't available anymore. We need some place to be bigger than life. And sport, regardless of where it is, if it's on a racquetball court or in a tent on a Sunday day in a seaside town, affords that arena. It gives you that bounded area. True, it's an artificial situation, but everything you feel is actual. The pain is actual, the challenge is actual, your response is real. It's something that you can experience totally and directly. And so that competitive effort, it enables us to make that heroic activity. Now, as I see that then goes into our subconscious and becomes part of ourselves, and it becomes something we now use as material in producing our own art, just as any artist would do. Now, Frost once said, to write a poem, you have to have an experience. To live your life, you have to have some experiences to derive the material. And sport gives that good information. Now, I heard this interview Bill Moyes had with Theodore Roszak, and he was talking about his childhood as a Catholic and going to confession, and said, looking inside into this chamber of horrors. I think that we see too much bad inside of us. This is, again, what Reverend Schuller says about self-esteem. The churches have emphasized the bad instead of what's good. So sport tells us what's good about us. And then what happens during the week, and this is how I use it, I'm not sure how other runners do, but you kid, during the week when you're on these little training runs. Now, I run my training runs during the week at 2 minutes over my race pace. Now, suppose I'm racing, say, at 6 minutes and 30 seconds a mile. I go out and train at 8 minutes and 30 seconds. My body is virtuoso. 2 minutes slower, it feels like it's an Olympic champion, you know. It can do it automatically. I just put my body on automatic pilot, let it have fun, and now I'm into my mind. And what's in my mind? Somehow that racing experience, that good feeling, the good experience I had with myself is going to come out in my day. That's why I say that these runners are transformed, that their lives are different because of their running. It's because of this experience they've had, this good experience they've had, and then the meditative run that comes out in something in their daily life. This is a little hard to think of your life as being a work of art, but it is. I remember something in Emerson where he said, the value of each individual soul is the ability to transform the world into a particular language. See, all artists are doing is transforming the world into their language, and as Emerson said, it need not be an essay or a statue or a piece of poetry. It might be a trade, it might be a profession, it might be a character, it might be just a way of life. And that's whatever your art is, whether your art is selling or teaching, or whether it's parenting, you're going to do it differently because of the different person you've become through that athletic experience. And so these people are different. And the way I see them, I think runners are wonderful people. And I don't think we were wonderful before we started running. We were like everybody else. And it's this thing that we've taken, this activity, not only the fitness, that's great. I mean, to become that body you're supposed to be, to have that hour for your body, but this competitive experience, there's no difference to me in a race as the winner, who is, you know, he's in his sweats by the time I get there. He has gone through the exact experience I have. And no difference between me and this housewife who's finishing minutes and many minutes behind me is having the identical experience. So it's this business of becoming the athlete that is the culmination of the fitness program. You begin by becoming fit. Fitness allows you to look for that life you're to lead. Being an athlete means you've found it.
George Sheehan is a physician who's been in practice since 1949. In 1972, he became medical editor of Runner's World. Currently, he educates other doctors as well as the general public on fitness. Dr. Sheehan is the director of radiocardiography and stress testing at the Riverview Hospital in Red Bank, New Jersey, and has been running competitively for years, including completing the last 20 Boston marathons. He's written 5 books on fitness and has an enormous following coast to coast. Sports Illustrated said, "He is maybe the most important philosopher of sport. We know you'll be motivated by what you will learn from him." Dr. George Sheehan.